GoForThe2.com. We have our Week 7 breakdown of a great matchup between the 17th ranked Stanford Cardinal and the 7th ranked Notre Dame Fighting Irish. The game is 3:30. It's on NBC. It's out South Bend, and we're going to give you some news and notes about both sides of the ball for each team. We'll talk a little bit about the series, and we'll have a prediction for this game Thursday on our website and on YouTube, so check it out. The series over the last 3 years has been owned by Stanford. They're 3-0 with an average margin of victory of 15 points per game. The last time Notre Dame defeated Stanford was back in 2008, in which they picked up a 28-21 victory. Stanford's 17th in the country. They're 4-1. Their only loss coming on the road at Washington. Notre Dame ranks 7th. They're 5-0, and they look to pick up another victory and inch a little bit closer to a possible BCS title game. They have the schedule to do it. This is another step in that road. Can they do it? We'll have to see this weekend, and we'll have a prediction as well for this game a little bit later in the week. Let's talk about Stanford right now. They struggled last week against Arizona. They were down 14 points at home to the Arizona Wildcats. They had to rally back and pick up an overtime victory against Arizona at home. Now they traveled a long way to Indiana, a long road trip. How do they fare on the road this weekend will be a key question mark for head coach David Shaw and his coaching staff. He did have to light the production last week at a quarterback, Josh Nunez. He did throw for 360 yards and 2 touchdowns. He added another 3 touchdowns rushing, and they got a strong performance by Josh Nunez, his strongest performance to date. The last time he played on the road was 2 weeks ago. They came out of a bye week after beating USC, and they struggled on the road at Washington, losing a 17-13 game. So how does that affect the team as they go on the road this week? Stephen Taylor and the running game looked good last week. Stephen Taylor added 142 yards rushing. This is a very physical offensive line in Stanford. They're going to test Notre Dame, and they're going to need the running game to take the pressure off of Josh Nunez. Josh Nunez to date has struggled. He's only completed 54% of his passes, and he's going to need a better performance on the road against the second-ranked scoring defense in Notre Dame. Notre Dame's defense only giving up 7.8 points per game. They're going to need the passing game and Josh Nunez to step up to open up that running game. So can they do it will be a key question mark for the Stanford Cardinal. I think Stanford's going to need a better production out of the wide receiver position for heading into this game. Their leading receiver is Zach Ertz, the tight end, who only has 316 yards receiving on the year through 5 games. That's only an average of about 61 yards per game. They're going to need a better production out of the wide receivers to stretch Notre Dame's defense and to open up the holes in the running game. Notre Dame will look to stuff the run and force Nunez to beat them, and they're going to need a better effort out of the wide receivers in order to open up and spread out Notre Dame's defense. Can they do it will be a key question mark whether they win this ball game or not. Defensively for Stanford, they have a very good defensive front. They're only giving up 21.8 points per game, and they're very physical. They're built like Notre Dame with a very strong offense and defensive lines, and they have to try and get pressure on Everett Golson and force turnovers in order to have a chance to win this ball game. Stanford is +5 in turnover margin. They don't give up a lot of points, and they force teams to methodically work down the field and look for the same type of game plan out of Stanford this week, forcing Notre Dame to slowly work down the field. Look for them to shut down the running game of Notre Dame, which picked up 376 yards of rushing offense against Miami. That's a concern for Stanford heading into this ball game. You want to slow down Notre Dame's rushing attack, as they have 3 good backs now, Sierra Wood, Theo Riddick, and George Atkinson III, that can spread defenses, and Stanford's going to have to stuff the run first and force Everett Golson into quick reads, and they're going to have to get some pressure on Everett Golson and look for turnovers in this game to have a chance to win. for Notre Dame and head coach Brian Kelly. What can you say? You're 5-0. You had a very strong and impressive output on a neutral field last week. They shut down the Miami Hurricanes. They picked up a 41-3 dominant victory. They were led by a three-headed rushing attack. They accounted for 376 yards rushing on Miami. They're balanced now. Everett Golson, who was suspended for the first series last week for violating team rules, came off the bench. He threw for 17 of 22 for 186 yards. He picked up another 51 yards rushing, and that gives an added dimension to the Notre Dame offense. But the key has been over the last couple of weeks that running attack. Sierra Wood, Theo Riddick, and that offensive line has created holes for Notre Dame and kept pressure off of Everett Golson in order to make his reads. Look for the same type of game plan. Brian Kelly has shown, and his coaching staff has shown, that they are a very disciplined team. They don't make many mistakes, and they have an uncanny ability to get teams out of their game plan while Notre Dame stays within theirs. They are +9 in turnover margin. They've only turned the ball over 4 times in 5 games, so that's a very their ball security is very good heading into this matchup against Stanford. They are back home. The fans will look to be into this ball game, especially with Notre Dame at ranked 7th in the country and a chance to move up even higher. Expect an electric atmosphere and expect Brian Kelly and his staff to use the running game in order to open up play action for Everett Golson and the wide receivers and tight end Tyler Eifert. So that's a key game plan that Brian Kelly and his staff will have in place. They had a great effort last week on the road in terms of rushing, and look for the same type of effort this week against Stanford. However, we must note, though, this is the toughest defensive line in terms of physicality that Notre Dame has faced this year. So that's going to be a cause of concern for Notre Dame. How do they match up? They've been stellar to date. Now they have another step up in competition. How does that offensive line play against Stanford's defensive front? Defensively for Notre Dame, they've been outstanding. They've only given up 7.8 points per game. The defensive ends, Stephen Tuitt and Capron Moore, have gotten pressure on quarterbacks. They got pressure last week on Stephen Morris and created Morris into quick reads and forced him into short to intermediate throws. If you do have a question mark for Notre Dame, it's got to be the speed of the secondary. If you watched the game last week against Miami wide receiver Philip Dorsett was able to get behind that defense early in that ball game, but Miami wasn't able to take advantage because of drop passes by Dorsett. He had 3 key drops deep balls that could have helped the Hurricanes in terms of ball field advantage and deep throws and scoring opportunities, and Miami couldn't take advantage of it. To date, Stanford hasn't shown a legitimate wide receiver that could stretch the field. Their leading wide receiver is the tight end, but if you do have a concern for Notre Dame, it has to be the speed in the secondary. Notre Dame is very opportunistic. They're led by their leader, Manny Te'o, who has shown a great ability in pass coverage. His ability in pass coverage allows Brian Kelly and his defensive staff to get different guys in there and not use a lot of blitzes. They're getting pressure with the 3 and 4 man front, and Te'o's ability to cover in pass coverage is a main reason why Notre Dame has created 13 turnovers on the year through 5 games. So keep an eye out for that. How does Notre Dame's defense look to stuff Stephon Taylor and force Josh Nunez into making his throws? He's only completing 54% of his passes, and I think Notre Dame will look to put even more pressure on Nunez, stuff the line of scrimmage, force Nunez into making reads and making throws, especially on the road. And whether he can do that will be a question mark heading into this game. Stay with us. It's going to be a great matchup. Brian Kelly has his team at 5-0. David Shaw, very underrated coach there. Stanford's 4-1. It'll be a great matchup. Stay tuned for the prediction on Thursday at GoForThe2.com.